Welcome back to Sorry Not Sorry. I'm Pastor Krieg alongside Pastor Cholak.
Howdy, howdy.
We're here today to episode 11.
Wow.
They just keep coming, right?
They do. That's pretty fun.
But today's episode, I think we want to look a little bit about the problem of evil. And obviously evil is a problem, but when we talk about it in apologetic terms, what difficulty does the existence of evil have towards us in proving that God exists or doesn't exist for the atheist? And the problem of evil often comes up as a proof that, well, God doesn't exist because of evil.
Yeah, it's that age-old question. If God were a loving God, why would he allow evil to be maintained?
Right. Yeah. And so that's what we'll look at today and try to decipher through the most common argument and objection used by those who want to disprove God as far as the existence of evil and how we approach it and how we can answer when people say that. So I think I'll first maybe just get a definition of what evil is. In secular world, I looked up, and just if you look in your dictionary, you're going to see for evil, profoundly immoral and wicked. At least that's what the internet told me. Merriam-Webster's Internet Dictionary.
So it's a status against a moral code or a baseline.
Exactly. So because of that, profoundly immoral, so there is that baseline you talk about. There is morality somewhere, and evil goes against that morality.
So that means that you have to believe that there's a morality.
You do. You have to believe there's morality. Although I think a secularist could say, well, that's true, but morality is subjective. So my morality and your morality may not be the same thing, but yet could still be valid. That's the argument anyway. But yes, you do have to agree that there is some sort of morality. Where that morality comes from,
right? And that could present a problem if you're trying to say that there is no God. Well, then where does your morality come from?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what is going to be, and we'll wind up seeing that the existence of evil is really difficult for a atheist to get around. And more so than the argument, well, if God exists, and why does he allow evil to exist for the Christian? I think it's much easier for the Christian to get around that objection than for the atheist to explain evil.
Exactly.
So we have evil, and then hand in hand what goes with evil is sin. And the definition of sin is simply, once again, an immoral act that typically goes against some sort of divine law. So sin, we have more of a theological connotation to it.
Yeah, and these two showing up give us this, what St. Paul tells us is that the law is written on our heart. Mm-hmm. So where you said that morality is subjective, it may be subjective because what's written on our heart can't always be read clearly, depending on your circumstances and the influence of conscience, for instance.
And our fallen nature fights against God and what he has even written in our hearts. So we try to go against what we know to be true, or we try to suppress the truth, and especially if it conflicts with something we want to do.
Yeah, and well, not to mention the fact that the world is trying to entice you to all of the pleasures that it has, and Satan's trying to tempt you to whatever. So we have these three coming at us to blur the clear line of what the morality is written on our heart.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt. So we look at those secular definitions, or just the normal definitions, and I think nobody's going to argue with those. But then we look to see what it means in the Bible. What is the definition of evil and sin according to the Bible? And this is where we get to pretend we're scholars, linguists, and get into a little bit of the Greek and Hebrew.
I'll let you do the Hebrew.
Yeah, I read it backwards, so.
That poses a problem.
So does that mean I read it forward, or
I don't think so.
But yeah. So when we look to the Bible and the instances when the word evil and sin are used. They're numerous, and there's nuances as well. There's multiple words for sin and evil, both in the Greek and Hebrew. But when we talk to the ones that fit most succinctly with our secular definitions and the definitions that we're using today, the first one from Greek is
Poneru.
Poneru. Right? Is that it?
This is like the end all be all, because this is the evil that Jesus puts at the end of the Lord's Prayer.
Right. Deliver us from evil. This ponero, this, and if you listen to the word, it's where we get the English derivatives of pornography, and these type of pornographic. The porn is from this word, and that it's derived from there. And like I said, it's wicked, it's evil, base. Is the root understanding and meaning behind this. And so when Christ in the Lord's Prayer tells us, deliver us from evil, this is the evil he's talking about.
Yeah. But there's another word that means bad or evil behavior. So I'm always amazed at how shallow English can be, right? And you have all of these wonderful, deep, beautiful words in Greek and in Latin and in Hebrew and these other languages. So there's more than one word for evil or bad.
And that, I think, because English is a relatively new language, and it borrows from so many other languages, the Greek, the Latin, the Hebrew, all of these. I mean,
but do you think as it gets older, it's getting dumbed down? Like if you compare King James English to...
I would say as we get older, I think it morphs into almost a new language, or it's not even English anymore. It's just whatever it is now.
Is it text English?
It might be emoji.
Emoji English?
Yeah. But you are right. We there's so much lost in translation with from the original to
I mean, last week we talked about the fact that there are like 4 words for love in Greek, and now we're seeing 2 words for evil. Right. I mean, this is just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and the 2 words we're looking at, those are the main 2. There's like 7 or 8 that you can really look at, but these are the ones that are the ones we need to concentrate on. And so that second one in Greek is kakos, right?
Yeah.
And
bad or evil behavior.
Bad or evil behavior. Is there a English derivative from this? I had to look it up. I couldn't think of one, so I looked it up.
I can only think of bad, like potty humor.
Right.
Which I don't want to.
And actually, that I was looking at that, and they said that probably wasn't actually a derivative of it, but it could be.
Good. Then I will retract.
Cacophony.
Oh.
Yeah, it comes from this. It's a derivative of it. So when you use cacophony, it's not a positive word.
It's not a positive word.
It's not a positive. It has a negative connotation to it. So
good to know.
So stop using it wrong, right? I guess.
I know.
I did. It took me back too. So, but I'm not a linguist, so that's what it is. But yeah, so we have this bad, this evil, and this is where when Paul uses it when he talks about, for I do not do the good I want, but the evil I don't want to do is what I keep doing.
The eye in the storm, so-called chapter of Romans 7.
And so this is where he uses this word. And so we look to the New Testament, we can see that. But then we look to the Old Testament. So whenever we look at the Hebrew, then for the evil and wickedness, depravity, we see the word is raha, and so it's like I said, when I was in seminary using memory devices, I would think of the Egyptian god Ra, and so if that helps anybody out there,
it almost is also like Ra, like when you fall and you skin your knee, it's raw.
There you go. So that might help you. But so it's this evil and wickedness. And we see this used in the end of Genesis when Joseph confronts his brothers. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And so we see it's using it in this way.
Boy. That's an amazing verse there. Maybe we'll come back to that at some point.
It is, and it's. I was one of my favorite parts of Genesis. Is that confrontation with Joseph and what he does.
But that begs the question: Is that the right term to use there? That it doesn't beg the question. That's a. It makes me ask.
Okay.
Having just taught logic, some of these like phrases from logic, But anyway, it makes me ask: is it a perspective issue? Like you and I think something is evil. The brothers thought it was evil what they were doing, but when God looked at it, He did not see evil. He saw something different. And of course, that doesn't apply everywhere because Satan's going to hell. Yeah, because he's evil.
and I do think it could be in some instances. I think also that God can, evil acts are committed. But even in those acts, God can use those. And for example, in Joseph's case,
right,
it was evil what his brothers did to him. But God used out of that tragedy, He was able to, affect what his will. And so we look at those as far as evil goes. Then we look to the Greek and Hebrew, the New and Old Testaments for sin. And so when we look to sin, what's the Greek?
Hamartia,
right? Hamartia, which is it's sin, and that's how it's used. Failure, but basically when we talk about sin, this is what we talk about. Couldn't find a Greek or an English derivative for that one. Only the Harmatologist is someone who studies wrongs.
Yeah, or someone who plays a harmonica.
Yeah. So
that'll
is it sinful? My daughter taught herself the harmonica. Now you just called her a sin.
Oh, no. That's the banjo. I meant the banjo. I got those confused.
Yeah, there you go. So we have that, and this one, but in this is important because in the same, when we talked in Romans 7:19, when Paul talks about the evil that he doesn't want to do, in the following verse he says, "Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me." And so we see the equating of evil and sin here together in the same passage that Paul's using, and so they're becoming equating those two.
Right. So moving to the Hebrew word, is there a correlation? What's the Hebrew word for
the Hebrew sin? Is chetet, which is chet aleph, pointed with seres. If you know what that means, you know Hebrew, and don't make fun of my pronunciation. If you don't know what it means, just assume I pronounced that word right.
So they taught us in seminary that when you're reading off a whole bunch of names, just act like you know it.
Yeah, say it with confidence. Nobody's going to question you.
No one will.
But right, and so that's to miss the mark, to sin, and this one does as well, because before, when we talked about what evil was, when Joseph confronts his brother, before that, Reuben. Remember, if we recall, he's the brother that says, "Hey, maybe we don't need to kill him," because that was the original plan, was let's just kill him because he's a jerk, more or less,
yeah.
And we don't like him. And Reuben says, "No, let's not kill him. Let's not do this." And so Reuben says, "Did I tell you not to sin against the?"
We will return to your scheduled programming shortly, or we are currently experiencing technical difficulties. We will return to your scheduled programming shortly, or we are currently experiencing technical difficulties.
This is Pastor Krieg, and we're sorry for the interruption. The camera went out in the middle of filming, so we were not able to splice it back together in any manageable way. So what the point I was making was that the Hebrew word for evil, which Joseph uses in Genesis 50, is equated by Reuben with the word for sin in Genesis 42:22. So if you'd like to go back and read through those and compare the evil and sin are synonymous once again, that was the point being made. So sorry for the interruption, and we return you now to your regularly scheduled program, already in progress.
Proving that the law is written on our heart, we have a devastating feeling, emotion, grief, guilt, terror that comes to us.
We do, because we know deep down, in our bone, that intuition, that conscious, and that we call what we call a conscience, is is telling us that this isn't right. This isn't supposed to be. Now we may not fully understand it, or we may be good at suppressing that, but it still exists. And so
we're not always so great. I mean, at suppressing it, we have moments where, depending on the other situations in our life, it bubbles up to the top. And that's why so many people who, for instance, you used your earlier example of abortion, oh, it's just healthcare. And then there's deep depression and
the long-term effects of
sadness afterwards
on women and men who have chose that option is, I mean, that's a scandal in itself that the medical community doesn't address that, the depression and the health, the mental health of the parents that choose to destroy the life of their child is ongoing.
Right. Or those who are experiencing deep depression over what they perceive to be their gender issues, and then when they quote unquote transition and find no relief.
Right. I mean, you see a higher rate of suicide and post-op transgender individuals. People have gone through the surgery because that was the last thing they can do to be completely whatever they feel their gender is, and they get to that point, and there's a realization that they still feel just as bad, that they're just not. That didn't fix it. And so you have actually a higher rate of suicide among those individuals. So we have this idea that, well, the evil doesn't exist then, and the argument then comes to the Christian is then does this existence of evil disprove the existence of God? Because atheists may say it doesn't exist, but they'll tell you think it exists because you're a Christian. So shouldn't that disprove the existence of God? Because one, if God is all powerful and God is good, then God can stop evil from happening. God can create a world without evil and stop evil from happening, but yet evil exists. So God either doesn't exist or at least is all powerful and as you present him to be. And that's more or less the argument.
You and I had a conversation with someone else earlier today where we were talking about the recurring event of humanity trying to project onto God how he's supposed to act as God. One of the best examples of us doing this shows up in one of Jesus' parables, and that's the parable of the prodigal son. A lot of people miss this part, maybe, I don't know, but he's sitting there trying to decide what to do when he's hungry and he's feeding pigs, and he comes up with his confession, but then he also writes his own absolution, telling his dad what his dad's going to do when he gets back.
Right.
You're going to make me into a servant.
Yeah, this is what you'll do for me. And
we do this all the time. God, this is how you're going to act. You can't allow there to be evil because you're a good God. Well, from his perspective, he can do what he wants.
and that ultimately the question would then be, can these logical contradictions, you can't have a good God or ultimately what it's going to boil down to is God's going to not contradict who he is. And he's going to act always consistently according to his nature, or however he is, and he is good. So he will always act good.
How does Paul put it? When we are not faithful, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself.
And there it is, right? And God tells us through Paul who he is and how he interacts with us and how he acts himself. So it sometimes may appear that God is inconsistent with his own nature, but it simply isn't. He doesn't lie because he's truth. He doesn't do evil because he is good. But he also isn't going to he didn't create a world of automatons. He didn't want robots that just served him. He didn't, he could have just invented toasters and been happy with it. He wanted a relationship based in love. So he creates us to give us life, to know his love, to know him as as our creator. And you see that perfection in the garden with Adam and Eve before the fall. But yet to have that, there has to be free will. There has to be a level of free will to be able to choose against God. And that's what we do because we're weak. And that's what Adam and Eve did in the garden. They said, no, I don't like this relationship. I think it can be better because this snake told me it could be better.
Yeah. I can be like God.
Yeah, I can be God. I can be his equal. And so God created the world because for love to exist, it has to, this true relationship, it has to be reciprocal. Your toaster's not going to love you even if it makes perfect toast. It doesn't care about you.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It just doesn't.
The other thing that pops in my head often is the fact that God tells Adam and Eve that in the day that they eat from the tree, they will surely die.
Yep.
And there really could have been just God walking up to the switch and flipping it and everything gone, over, done in that day. But we didn't quite understand what death was in his perspective. And he didn't flip a switch. He continues to come into the midst of us.
And I think this goes to, once again, the consistency of who God is. He created us to give us life. He created us to have a relationship with us. And to destroy that goes against why he created us in the first place. And so he preserves it. He rectifies the mess that we created. We didn't, he doesn't create sin. We create sin. We bring evil into the world. And we can probably go back also into a time when we don't know much about in the creation of the rebellion against God in the angels with Satan. Sometime in that days of creation, angels obviously had some sort of free will to some extent to rebel against God himself. Another creature rebels against God, and in that moment is there in the garden, and continues to want to rebel against God, continues to want to destroy all the good things that God has given, that God has created, and the pinnacle of God's great creation is mankind, and Satan wants to destroy that.
And to a testimony of his nature, which is love, God continues to preserve and to keep, and then I think one of the most beautiful things, to continue to fight for us.
Without a doubt, and he manifests, like 1 John 4 tells us, God is love, and it says it over and over. God is love, continuously. And how is that love shown? Well, it's shown in His Son, sending Him to us, dying for us, reconciling us. And it's also shown in the garden when He doesn't just flip a switch and start all over, but does what it takes to an excruciating degree to reconcile us by sacrificing His own Son,
and goes through with it.
Right? So, I think this kind of introduces us to the problem of evil and some of the objections people might have. As we continue on, we'll continue to look at this question and delve into some other apologetic strains in which people might come at you and try to question your kind of the gotcha questions that a lot of people want to try to pin you down on. And so we'll continue to look at those as we go forward.
In the meantime, if you'll hit subscribe, hit the bell.
Yeah, ring the bell, do all that
stuff. Tell
your
friends.
And so we'll come back next week with another episode. So until then, I'm Pastor Krieg.
I'm Pastor Cholak.
Have a blessed day.
Take care.